The abuse scandal, and I'm gonna spend a minute on this, even though it's a topic I don't like. I don't like to think about, but there's some elements to this that I never see being discussed. That's very related to the left-right traditionalist, conservative, left progressive paradigm. Okay, if you look at the data, right, and I'm talking about go back to the one of the best reports that came out was was I think it was called the Sullivan Report. Okay, and there's some interesting things about how he says we have to collect the data on abuse. And one of the things that happened was the way that such events were reported. Okay. And if you see the decades starting in the 40s through the 50s, through the 60s, through the 70s and 80s, you start to see this rise, this increase in abuse cases. Now, some on the right have read that as an infiltration. Okay, we know where I'm going with that, right? As if suddenly, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, the church was infiltrated. Okay, the reality is the church wasn't just all of a sudden infiltrated. The reality is that there was, for the first time, independent third party agencies that abuse could be reported to after the 1950s. Before that, and you hear this and the testimony of people that were abused as children. Oftentimes they would go to the adults, be it their parents, be it their teachers, the ones that were supposed to protect them. They would go and they would report that something happened to them, and they were all but told to shut up. Kids were to be seen, not heard. And what the Sullivan Report found, at least reported, was that, well, one, the reason in the 1960s, so when it comes to something like abuse, you have to wait about 20 years. Okay, so in the 60s, the those that were children in the 1940s began reporting the abuse as adults. Okay, okay. In the 70s, they were adults were reporting the abuses from the 50s, and the 80s, the 60s, so on and so forth. And the church was doing the shuffling around that was the cause of the scandal, right? Now, I don't think, keeping up with this, right? It's not that all of a sudden in the 1940s, boom, these priests infiltrated the church. It's that for the first time ever, the reports were taking place. I'm of the opinion, I don't think the Sullivan Report goes into this because the report wasn't about speculation. It was just compilation of data, some interpretation of the data. It's probably been going on for a very long time in many different places, including the church, for a very longer than we want to even speculate about. Maybe back as far back as early in our history. Okay, but now, because there's third party independent places that people could report, these things are being reported and they're being dealt with. So that's a change that few people on either side take the time to work through what all of that means, right? Instead, they want to see like a grand narrative of something like infiltration, right? But that's a tradition that I think needed to be reformed. I think we do need third party independent verifications, because if you go through something like the training Virtus, I believe it's called. I took it a while back, but anyways, there's an emphasis on integration between access to children and to people that know one another. So two adults, like a couple, can't be the two adults present. Okay, there's got to be somebody that's independent brought in, that's not related to each other, to each other, to watch over, to have responsibility over youth. So that's just a long way of saying that I understand also the need for reform and change on things. But we have to filter it, and we have to sift through. I don't just want to steamroll over the entire past, because I don't think that all of these were corrupt and wicked priests. There's always been good priests and there's always been bad. Okay. And I want to retain the things that are good of the past and filter out the things that are bad. But, that takes small, specialized groups that can interpret and make and enforce effective changes. But I digress.